Welcome to another episode of Full Build Friday, where I try to build a character from a comic, game, or similar source using the baseline rules of Pathfinder Second Edition and the Path Builder app. This week, we continue to explore options presented in Howl of the Wild, as I try to build a character that I have been sitting on for a while, and that I wasn't entirely certain in regards to how I would build. But with the release of this new book, options have emerged to create Tahm Kench, the River King.
Call me king, call me demon. Water forgets the names of the drowned.
Before we set off sailing down this river, we need to make sure we're in ship shape by establishing some build goals. Tahm Kench is a demon personifying addiction and gluttony who hides his own horrifying hunger beneath a veneer of charm and civility. Taking the form of a corpulent, conniving catfish, Tahm Kench offers deals to others, letting them indulge before he devours them and everything they cherish. Classified as a warden, Tahm is a defense-focused character that is intended to lock down enemies while protecting his allies. His acquired taste passive applies stacks with each of his attacks, while dealing more damage based on his maximum health. The stacks applied by this come into play with his first ability, Tongue Lash. His tongue darts out in a target direction and normally damages and slows an enemy, while healing him if he hits a champion. But if that enemy has 3 stacks of acquired taste, they are stunned instead of slowed. Tahm can get into the fight through Abyssal Dive, in which he summons a pool of water that he dives into before erupting beneath enemies to damage and knock them up. Next up for his abilities is Thick Skin, which stores a portion of damage he takes as Grey Health. Out of combat, this Grey Health will heal faster than normal, or he can activate it to turn this Grey Health into a shield. He then rounds out his abilities with Devour, which can target champions to swallow allies, protecting them and hastening Tahm, or target enemies to suppress and damage them. This is also the focus of his card in Legends of Runeterra, generating cards that allow him to consume others. To bring it all together, Tahm Kench is a demon whose sweet-talking sophistication disguises a horrible hunger, exemplified by the attacks that he makes with his tongue and jaws, to the point where he even swallows enemies. His rotundness affords him some considerable tankiness, and he can dive into battle with an ally, or by himself through dark waters, emerging to disrupt foes. With those goals in place, let us indulge in this buffet of a build for this burly brawler. We're going to start, as we always do, with Tahm's ancestry, picking out the new Athamaru ancestry from Howl of the Wild. I wanted to go for the Nephilim heritage, given his demonic nature, but I think it's actually a better choice to take the Hopeful heritage, which will make Tahm a large creature, an aspect that will become particularly useful down the line. I do have a slight issue with the design of the Athamaru where I feel like it has too many feet lines, rather than distinct feats, but with that being said, we will be taking Coral Symbiosis to start with, mainly because it affords him a little bit more defensive capabilities, minor though they may be. It will work out nicely for him later in the build, as well with the options that it opens up. His background is significantly simpler. Charlatan seems like it is the best fit for this cruel, conniving catfish. This will make him trained in deception and underworld lore, while also granting him the Charming Liar skill feat, letting him use his deception to make an impression and lure his victims into the dark deals that he's known for offering. All this leaves is Tahm's class, which, despite his urbane persona, is going to be the Barbarian. The Barbarian has the highest hit points out of any class in the game, and given Tahm's passive, high HP is typically how you want to build him, while the extra damage aspect from that same passive comes from his rage. Speaking of his rage, he will use the animal instinct for the frog, which nets him a jaws, and more importantly, a tongue strike. This is important just for representing Tahm's basic attacks, but it will eventually play into his tongue lash when it gains reach. The jaws are also indicative of the character, but while Tahm is prone to bouts of savagery and gluttony, he tries to keep a facade of a suave businessman, and that lends itself to the Moment of Clarity feat. This class feat will be important for other aspects of his build, and will be coming online shortly, but not quite yet. For the time being, we still have skills to speak of, scant as they are. Barbarians are automatically trained in athletics, and Tahm will take up acrobatics, intimidation, and religion. Obviously, strength and constitution are important, but I also want to suggest a focus on charisma, and I personally rated it higher than constitution, at least starting out here. I understand that this design isn't entirely functional, it's not a great idea, but it does fit the fantasy of the character, and that is what I am aiming for here. And that charisma will actually be important as we waddle our way into level 2 to take Sorcerer Dedication. From this we will pick up the demonic bloodline, representing the true nature of, oh my god, he's a catfish, like he is catfishing, he is scamming you, I just got that. Okay, sorry, anyway, this bloodline represents his true nature as a demon. He gets 2 skills out of this, which I will take for Society and Survival, since those are the feats that let him subsist, as well as 2 cantrips. The only spell here I would really suggest is Rousing Splash, a fun little cantrip that gives him temporary hit points, which can serve to represent the shield of his thick skin, though he'll have to use a Moment of Clarity to cast it while raging. Now through this there is a way to build into obtaining Abyssal Dive, but for the most part I'm actually going to be looking into leaping rather than diving into the fray. Quick Jump is the first step in making that a possibility, allowing Tahm to jump into a fight as a single action. And you know what? As much as a catfish as he is, I get it now, there's definitely some frog in that makeup of his as well, which fits nicely with this handy little skill feat. At 3rd level, Tahm takes Toughness, because I had to spend some boosts that I would have put towards Constitution on Charisma at 1st level. This helps to make our fish tankier, and is probably one of the more appropriate uses of Toughness, a feat that I'll often just take to fill up spaces. He increases his Athletics skill, which will help him jump, but it will also help him lock down opponents with maneuvers, such as grapples, trips, and shoves. I'm making particular note of this because this is how we're going to accomplish Tahm's stuns with Tongue Lash and maybe a little bit of the suppression of his Devour ability through grappling enemies. This greedy Goblin Guppy keeps on his archetype at 4th level by taking the basic Bloodline spell, which will grant him the Glutton's Jaw focus spell. There are few features fitted so finely for this fiendish fish as this spell, letting him gain temporary hit points when he strikes with his jaws, resembling the healing that he gains from hitting champions with his Tongue Lash. Then, given his current form, Underwater Marauder feels like a must-have for Tahm. This makes him a much more capable fighter in the water, something that he should obviously be highly capable at. His 5th level Ancestry feat will be spent on Coral Growth. This allows him to survive without food or drink while underwater, but more importantly, allows him to be on land without needing to take a break to submerge himself in water. Though, I can't really find where it says that the Athamaru has to do it. Maybe I'm just missing it. As for skill increases, he'll get Religion up to Expert for the purpose of taking his spellcasting feats, and an increase to Intelligence will make him trained in Diplomacy, though Deception is still his preferred social skill. On the topic of spellcasting feats, Tahm takes Basic Sorcerer Spellcasting as a stepping stone at 6th level. His high charisma makes it so that you can gamble on spell attacks and DCs if you want, but I would still focus on utility spells, with protection being at the forefront to increase his defensive aspects. Following a similar concept as Quick Jump earlier, Tahm then takes Powerful Leap as his skill feat. I think this is important as Tahm is a little slower, physically, as an Athamaru than some other characters, and so increasing his leap range is a good get. We stay on the topic of Tahm lagging behind his teammates a little to take Fleet as his general feat, so that he doesn't fall too far behind, especially if they start taking Fleet as well. That just sets him right back to where he started, but obviously closer than he would be if he hadn't taken this feat. 7th level also nets Tahm his specialization ability, increasing the damage of his natural attacks, and giving 10 feet of reach to his tongue. A skill increase goes to athletics, making him a master in it this time around. As his 8th level class feat, Tahm picks up Basic Blood Potency to gain the Cantrip Expansion Sorcerer feat. I don't actually think this is super important for Tahm, but he needs Basic Blood Potency to take Advanced Blood Potency, and this is a setup for that. If you're picking more damaging spells for Tahm, you could go for Dangerous Sorcery, but I stuck with utility options such as Heroism as his 3rd rank spell here. I do obviously want to explore some Deception options for Tahm, which means that he takes Lie to Me as a skill feat for this level. I think I've said this before on a different build, but you can't con a con artist, and while Tahm's prices are much steeper than others, at his core, that is what he is. I mentioned that I think the Athamaru kinda pigeonholes you into feat lines, and it feels a little late to me to go back to pick up the other ones, but he can take Skilled Swimmer at 9th level, which lets him just fully ignore difficult terrain when he's in an aquatic environment, including swimming up or down. It just makes him a teensy bit faster in his preferred environments. Following the same pattern from before, he uses a skill increase to become a master in religion for this level. We've looked at a couple ways to cover the shield from thick skin, the temporary HP from rage, the rousing splash cantrip he picked up, and 10th level features another one in the form of renewed vigor. This grants him a single action that he can spend to gain, at this level, 7 temporary hit points. And while that isn't a lot, it's nothing to sneeze at either. Getting 7 temp HP every round as a third action instead of attacking is great. It adds up over time. This level does also, obviously, come with a skill feat, which Tahm spends on Hefty Hauler to possibly help him lug around the bulk of his teammates. I know it doesn't really work out, but he is large, meaning that an ally could potentially ride him, letting him carry them into the fight, a la Devour. When Tahm doesn't turn his thick skin into a shield, he can slowly recover it out of combat. This inspires the choice of fast recovery as his general feat at 11th level. This definitely occurs at a slower pace than it does in the League, but our tanky tempting tuna takes what he can get. Fast healing isn't exactly common for players. He also finally gets around to increasing Deception, becoming an expert in it. I really wish he could have taken this sooner, but the other skills unfortunately felt more important to me and more practical to the build. Speaking of these important skills, he needed that religion to take Expert Sorcerer Spellcasting at 12th level, just picking up some more spells. Now it is worth noting, this is the most important of these spellcasting feats, though we won't be talking about why quite yet, and I think you could probably drop the feat after this, but we can talk about that more when we get there. As for his skill feat, this crafty catfish collects Confabulator to help him interweave his deceptions and draw dupes deeper into his dealings before he devours them. It feels appropriate for him, and just in general exploring these deception options feel like they better suit the character. Now another aspect of building a tank in League specifically is the Tenacity trait, which reduces the duration of crowd control on a character. We can explore that a little bit with Coral Reserve as Tahm's Ancestry feat at 3rd level, which, once per day, allows him to suppress the enfeebled or fatigue condition. I do think this is very important for a barbarian as well, because fatigued is what stops you from raging. I still wish this applied to more conditions, but these are good ones to block, especially for a melee combatant like Tahm. Naturally, he is going to increase Deception again to become a master in it, getting the skill up there with his other foci. There is a spell that is a perfect fit for Tahm's Abyssal Dive, but he can't quite get it. Instead, he takes Sudden Leap at 14th level so that he can jump into the fight and land with a strike, because making a strike at any point of the jump includes the end of it. Admittedly, this only strikes a single creature, but at least it fits the general concept of this ability. Through Tahm's mastery of Deception, he can then take Slippery Secrets as his skill feat, mainly to help him hide his true nature from those trying to perceive it. Let him maintain his mystique before the munchies get him going. At 15th level, instead of taking a pure general feat, Tahm will take Cloud Jump so that he can sudden leap vast distances, resembling his long-range abyssal dives. This level also comes with ability boost, and 1 in intelligence makes him trained in occultism, while his regular skill increase can make him a legend in athletics. Alright, sit tight because 16th level is big, but it comes with a major choice. It is at this level that Tahm can take Advanced Blood Potency to pick up Cross-Blooded Evolution. This is a sick sorcerer feat that lets him explore a spell list other than his own, because honestly, Divine isn't quite cutting it. However, it only lets him swap out a single spell, and that's where it gets rough, because Tahm could use this to pick up Dive and Breach, which is a perfect representation of his Abyssal Dive. He leaps into a puddle he creates, and then erupts out of another, damaging enemies at both ends, which adds a little bit more pizzazz to it. Now keep in mind that while it isn't perfect, we have explored this a little bit with Sudden Leap, and there's another aspect that I think is even more important, and that is his Devour ability. This was an ability I initially only intended to represent through grapples and maybe the Thrash feat, but Howl of the Wild not only gave me the Athamaru, it gave me an opportunity through the addition of a new spell to represent this, a little thing called Snake Fangs. As you might have guessed from the description, this gives him a Fangs attack that deals him extra poison damage, but more importantly than that, it lets the caster use Swallow Whole against a creature that it has grabbed. Now, this does have to be a creature of at least one size smaller than Tahm, but fortunately, through our heritage, he is large, which means he can gulp up medium creatures. I wasn't really expecting an ability like this to ever show up, and so I was fully planning on taking Dive and Breach until I found this option, and suddenly the choice became way harder. With that being the case, I'm going to leave the choice up to you guys. I know which one I would personally go with, you'll probably see it on the character sheet at the end, but yeah, that is up to you. I will say, choosing his skill feat is a little bit easier, as he takes Sacred Defense, taking advantage of his religion skill to gain temporary hit points, which fits in with his thick-skinned shield, and it's fun that it comes from his skill feat options. If the enemies do manage to whittle through all of those shields and actually get Tahm down, he gets a little trick up his sleeve at 17th level. Coral Lifeline builds out of the symbiotes he starts with, and once per day, it stops him from dying, and instead immediately restores 4d8 hit points. Now, hopefully he's got casters that can follow up with some actual healing, but if he doesn't, we do have all those temporary HP options to try to use again so that he can at least survive. He can also jump back into a rage after this by using his other Coral feat to suppress the fatigue condition and get that going again. Additionally, to that end, to the temporary HP, he'll become a legend in religion, increasing it and the likelihood of him succeeding, or critically succeeding, on his check for Sacred Defense. Following his acquisition of the legendary religion skill, Tahm can gain Master Sorcerer spellcasting as a class feat. The main purpose behind this, aside from potentially increasing his spell attacks and DCs, is that it gives Tahm 7th rank spells, which he could potentially heighten his Snake Fangs to, increasing its effectiveness across the board. However, with the Snake Fangs kind of captured, with that reflecting his Devour, another option you could take here is Impressive Landing from the Barbarian. This lets him deal damage in an area and upset foes a little bit, representing the knockup of his Abyssal Dive. He's back to Deception for his skill feats, picking up Doublespeak, letting him slip messages to his allies even when he's in the middle of a conversation with another creature. By this point, Tahm is a master in Perception, which means he can take Super Taster as a general feat, an option that feels perfectly suited for this Decadence Devouring Demon. As for his skill increase, he'll spend it on Deception to become a legend in it. To really sell Tahm's tankiness at 20th level, he picks up Unstoppable Juggernaut, which I feel like I take a lot, but it does give him resistances to all damage, and also as a way to bring Tahm back after dropping, which means that he now has two options to come back after going down between this and his Coral Lifeline feat. For his skill feat, Reveal Machinations makes use of his Deception skill with an action to debuff enemies, and fortunately doesn't have the Concentrate trait. It's also a nice representation of the way he behaves when he comes to collect from those that have struck a deal with him. It's the end of the fishing line for this fearsome foe, but before we get filleted, we should take a look at taking him into a free archetype game. Obviously, the Sorcerer Dedication is the first pickup, but there's a new archetype in the Howl of the Wild called the Thlipit Contestant, which is all about fighting with the user's tongue. This lets him get a tongue strike even when he's not raging, and it comes with reach, making it a nice fit for Tongue Lash. A free archetype game does free up a number of his class feats, and the one that jumps out at me is Impressive Landing, which I talked about before at 18th level. It just helps him better represent his Abyssal Dive. Those two archetypes will fill up his feat slots quickly, which means that we have reached the depths of our dive into this Devourer. Tahm Kench, the River King, is a hopeful Athamaru barbarian with the frog animal instinct and the charlatan background, reflecting his manipulation of others to give in to their desires before he devours them. He uses his sorcerer archetype to take a demonic bloodline, demonstrating his true nature, while the barbarian class provides him with a massive pool of hit points and rage that lets him lash out with extra damage, though these are mostly tangentially related. Still, it's a good point towards the extra damage from his Acquired Taste passive. Speaking of his rage, his animal instinct grants him a tongue attack that gains reach, based on his tongue lash, though he'll have to rely on his athletics investment to find a way to cover the slow or stun of this effect. By taking the basic bloodline spell, he can gain Glutton's Jaw to gain an attack that grants him temporary hit points, matching the tiny bit of healing that his tongue lash affords him. We're also looking at mundane ways to recreate his abyssal dive, taking sudden leap and jump-based feats to crash in the midst of enemies, though this would be helped by slipping in impressive landing if you can. Fast recovery helps to heal him up a bit quicker, like how he recovers the grey health of his thick skin, while the shield it can be converted into comes in the form of renewed vigor, sacred defense, rousing splash, and even his rage. Finally, by delving into his sorcerer dedication and building towards cross-blooded evolution, he can pick up snake fangs and gain the ability to swallow whole, to devour his enemies. Between his might and hefty hauler, as well as his sheer size, he might also be able to cart allies around the battlefield, but unfortunately that aspect is a little lacking. This build makes Tahm Kench a true blue fish tank that can employ some surprising tactics thanks to his demonic bloodline and long tongue. The new spell Snake Fangs lets him swallow his enemies, and has the duration that he can be casting it before the battle breaks out. He leaps rather than dives into the middle of enemies to disrupt them. While out of combat, he uses his deception to lure them into dark deals. Dedicated to devouring dishes, this durable demon delights in deceiving dupes and drowning disputants while dreaming of dining on the desires of those dealers. It was fun to finally get around to building this character. He's been sitting on my mind for a while. He is one of my favorites from League. Let me know what you think of it and what other sorts of builds you'd like to see in a comment below. Check out the blog or Twitter for additional character sheets or item suggestions for each level, which are linked in the description. And then, have a fantastic Friday. We'll see you next time.
And the price is a minuscule thing. See, I got hungers that ain't easily fed, but those finest tables, they ain't never got a seat for me. So I need men like yourself to let me in.